to see what Barbados looked like today from the air in map form, we'd go to Google Earth and we'd end up with an image looking like this. It's possible to zoom in which case you can get all the more detail. John, Cliff Cottage, Clifton Hall, Newcastle, Huddersfield, John's Parish Church, Poole, Roebuck Street, Spooners, Sherburn, Venture, Wilson Hill, and so on. However, if we wanted to know what it looked like, what the island looked like hundreds of years ago, we'd go back to different types of maps that were done hundreds of years ago. The first map that was actually surveyed of the island was done in 1675 by a Quaker surveyor called Richard Ford, and this is what he produced. Again, you can actually go and zoom in and see what's going on. Like family, they are all the families that existed in Barbados on this map. Suppose I were to tell you that they're all Quaker families. So we're going to actually go and try to tell an untold story about Quakers in Barbados, starting in the 1640s, right up to the present. And we're going to use maps, wills, and deeds. This is just an introduction. The intention is to go to individual parishes and explain why we see today what we see. So I hope you all enjoy this presentation. Let's go back to these maps. This is the first map, well-surveyed map, done by Ford, the Quaker. This is the Mayo map, done in 1722 by William Mayo. I should say that both of these maps come from the John Carter Brown Library at Brown University. The Creative Commons license on them, so I'm using these maps because they're available on the internet, and I'm licensed to use them. So here you go. Mayo is here. And you have that's 1722. There's a change in the appearance. First of all, the parish boundaries now, so you can identify St. John clearly. And you have names like the Society, which we recognize now easily. St. John's Church, and all the other names around the place. But some of those names are gone now. But as we'll see, some of them remain in the actual field names. Let's turn on 1750 map. This is going to be the Griffith Hughes map, 1750. So it looks a little different, but you see the parish boundaries. The difference between these maps and the first map was that there were no parish boundaries that were actually surveyed. They existed, but they existed in people's minds. Landmarks were there, but the actual parishes and parish churches were there, but there were no actually delineated parishes. until Mayo in 1722. So this map is actually derived from Mayo. This map also derived. This map, Barbados, also derived from Mayo. Barbados is 1823. You can see the parish boundaries, zoom in, and you can see all the names. You can see all the names of their pool plantation. Haynesfield became Wakefield. John's Parsonage, St. John's Church, Clifton Hall, Colleton, the Society, Haynes Hill. Haynes Hill used to be the Fort Plantation. Fort was a family, a Quaker family. And you start seeing names that tell you of the Quaker presence. Place names, Harmony Hall. This is what was now known as Spooners, close to Four Crossroads. Four Crossroads. Silent Hall, this is Sherburne. So as you see, Silent, Quaker. So the names are there. Quentin is still there. The Bath. So let's zoom back out, and look at Parsons. Oops, Parsons. Let me see. Back out. Parsons is a little bit difficult to see. There you go. There's Parsons. That's 1873 Agricultural Survey. Then you've got the Sen map done in 1946. Alfred Sen was a Swedish, I think he's a Swedish geologist. He was charged with looking at the geology of the island. What he did was he mapped what was known as the basal contours, and he did it by going down there all of these wells all over Barbados and looking at the geology and ending up with the basal contours, where the coral starts to grow on top of the oceanics. So let's back out. Another map, 1951. 1951 this is an ordnance survey map of the island. It's in 18 sheets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and so on. This is all georeference to the 19 to the Google Earth map. So as all of them are, and stitched together, and looks like this. This map was produced by the first aerial photography of the island, and this is the photo mosaic of what the aerial photos look like stitched together. Okay, not all is done, but the idea is what they did was they basically flew the island in this pattern, taking photographs that overlapped. The photographs were then viewed stereoscopically, and the actual elevations were determined. So if you look back at this area in here, and you can actually see the elevations eventually come up. So here are the elevations. You actually have the contour lines, and these contour lines are taken from the aerial photos stereoscopically. So let's zoom back out. 1965, 66, somewhere in that area. A soil map was then prepared for the island. Here you have the soil map as it appeared 1965, 66. Let me see, turn it on here. Turn it on here. That's what it looks like. So look, if you look in here, for example, it just looks like gibberish at the moment, but the computer is a little slow. Here you have what is known as the dominant slope for the land in this area, and the 40 is the soil type. So if you were to put the actual fields on, or to actually put the fields on, here's what the actual fields would look like in that particular area. Turn off the plantations for the moment. Here's a here's a here are a couple of fields. This is at Halton, and the field names. Um, this is a field at Halton where Rouse family are buried. These are the garden fields. These are where everybody else was buried. Slaves, other Quakers, Irish, Roman Catholics, anybody who wasn't going in the churchyard. Let's look at over here, so at Kendall, because I think Kendall is a pretty interesting one too. So here's the Cottingeville. Let me zoom back out. Here's going up into Kendall now. Start from the actual fields. That's Guinea, right? When you get to Kendall, here's Kendall Factory. Here's Chester Garden and Dormo. They have those two fields. Come up here. Got names like Old Dwelling in Chapel Hill, Quaker. You've got Chester Garden, as I said, and Dormouse. Now let's see a little bit about Kendall Plantation and see what the Kerry papers have to say about it. Here it is that Osborne, who appears on the 1722 Mayo map, actually bought between 1712 and 1715 two plantations, Hallets and Chesters, and combined them together. So if you read from the fields, you can see the Chester Garden is to do with the Chester plantation, the old house, and back here again, trying to remember all these field names. Easy. Old Dwelling and Chapel Hill. Again, if you start to go back in time and come and turn off these various things, turn off the soil map, turn off the rows, turn off the map sheets, turn off Sons, Baralier, map of Barbados. Start to see. Here's Osborne in 1722 Mayo. When you go back, you'll see Kendall and Scott. Let me see if I get it. Here's Kendall and Scott. Here's Hallett. So it makes sense. The actual field names tell you a little bit about the history, and it's not going to surprise you to find out that all of these families were in fact Quaker families. They have the whole thing. Have the whole thing again. Okay. Now what we're going to do now is to look after when if all that work on the fields. These are the fields in Barbados. These are about 3,500 fields. Not all of them. This was done, but this work was done by Colin Hudson and some UWI students in the 1970s. So using the soil map, he was able to actually, they were actually able to produce a field list for plantations. And here, let me see if I can find it now. Let me see if I can find it now. If you look at Kendall Plantation is here. Kendall Plantation. If you look at Garden and Tenant Field, you'll see that you have a dominant slope, C and D, and main soil type, 50 and 51. If you look back at the footage on that particular field, you'll see the area in the soil map with the dominant slope and soil type defined. So it makes absolute sense. Let's go back to this. After the 1970s, when Colin did his work with the fields, there was another, let me turn off the fields again. There's another aerial survey of the island done, and it produced in 1981, 82, 1 in 10,000 ordnance survey map. That then superseded, or at least, I wouldn't say superseded, because they find that the one from 1951 is actually more accurate and has more detail than the 1 in 10,000 from 1982. Then there's the geology map done in 1982. Um, Again, it's like it's almost a repetition of it's almost a it is an addition. Let me put it this way to the work done by Sen, where he actually worked out the he actually by by the by going down the wells and looking at the actual geology at the bottoms, he could actually predict where the basal contours were. But this survey was done in 1982 using more modern technology, and these are the basal contours under the coral that supports the coral top of the oceanics as Barbados came out of the sea and sea level drop. Back here again and go back to this first map. What what about this map? What's interesting about this map is nobody seems to have commissioned it. It wasn't commissioned by the Lords of Trade in England. It wasn't commissioned by the governor in Barbados. But the Lords of Trade instructed the governor they wanted a chart of the island, and the governor produced this chart. So if you actually go back and see what the governor had to say about this chart over there, can't find it now. Let me see. Let's look at. I'm not seeing it now. Let's, But anyway, what the governor says about this chart is that nobody had till 16, up to 1680 done a survey of the island, except for this man called Richard Ford, who was a Quaker. So if it wasn't the government in England, and if it wasn't the governor in Barbados, who would have commissioned this map? It is interesting to look and see what is on the map. No forts. So a big deal is made of the fact that it was done by a Quaker because they don't believe in forts and that sort of thing. But look at this. You've got Friends plantations down here, so by Spikestown. This became the Quaker meeting, which is now St. Peter's Cemetery. So whoever drew this map, or whoever it was drawn for, wanted an account of these plantations. So what it appears to be that each one of these families here was a Quaker family, a member of the Society of Friends. So if we can't we, we can't find that out unless we go and look at what they left in their wills. So we hope that when we go and look at their wills, that we can find a reference to something that says they were Quakers. And as you go through each one, you should be able to determine whether they were Quaker or not. So let's go back now to where we started. Okay. So the thrust of this and subsequent presentations will be to say that this map is or was a membership roster of the Society of Friends in 1675. It was probably commissioned by George Fox himself when he visited the island in 1671, surveyed by Richard Ford, a Quaker, between 1671 and 1675, and then presented to the Lords of Trade in 1680 as the only chart of the island because the Quakers were so dominant. So the Quakers were not a minority that was oppressed in Barbados. The Quakers were the planters, merchants, the lawyers, the doctors, the church wardens, and the assembly, members of the assembly. The laws, however, were were basically coming to Barbados from England. So we'll deal with that a little bit further on in another presentation as we go through parish by parish and figure out who was a Quaker and who wasn't. Just a glimpse of what is to come. Here are two parishes. One is St. Thomas, and one is St. Joseph. All of these black dots are Quaker families, verified by looking at their wills. Circles, brown circles, are meeting places in fields called room field. Room is it's used as meeting room. It was a term that was used at the time of the nonconformist sects because they were not allowed to have a building or have anywhere that was called a church. So they had meeting rooms. And the red polygons are potentially the burying areas that exist in St. Thomas and St. Joseph. Quakers are in there, Slaves are in there. Irish are in there. All sorts of people are in there. Anyone who preferred not to be buried in a parish church here, down here. Barbados has an amazing history. I hope to engage people and share some of the insights I've gained in the research I've done over the years. Thank you for your attention.